Hey guys, today's video is all about Steven Seagal, Above the Law 1988. Say what you want about the man, but there's no denying there was a time where he was the shit. One of the top action stars for good reason. So we're going to go do a retrospective. I'm going to give you my commentary analysis on the film. I'm going to break it down, give you some good facts, and show some clips, and you'll see exactly why this film was so great. And hopefully he'll get the respect he deserves. There's a lot of Seagal haters out there.
Come get some.
It's okay, Steven. Put down the gun. Put down the gun, Steven. Good, Steven. Good. Maybe this will change your mind, or maybe this will make you a fan even. So make sure to stay tuned. I know you gotta be curious. First of all, full disclosure, guys. I was always a bigger Jean-Claude Van Damme fan, but that doesn't mean I couldn't appreciate Steven. When I was growing up, it was kind of like the Super Nintendo versus Sega Genesis. There's no reason why you couldn't like both, but kids are stupid, so you usually chose a side. And that was kind of the same with the action heroes, whether you were a Stallone or Arnold fan, whether you were a Van Damme or Seagal fan. I was a Van Damme fan, but later on in my 20s, I really started appreciating Steven Seagal, and that was partly because my Kenpo karate instructor at the time was a huge Steven Seagal fan, so he grew on me, watching some of the classics like Above the Law, Out for Justice, Marked for Death, etc. He really peaked with Under Siege, but anything Under Siege and prior to that, classic. And you're going to see that on this channel. Oh, and in case you're wondering why you should watch, well, I might be kind of an expert. I do, after all, have a master's in Seagology. So stay tuned on this channel for more Seagal in the future. Oh, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button and the notification bell so you can make sure you don't miss future Seagal content. But let's go back to Above the Law. I find the most interesting thing about this film, this was literally Seagal's first acting gig. He didn't do anything prior to this, so to have a major Hollywood studio, Warner Brothers at the time, backing them, that just doesn't happen. It didn't happen back then. It doesn't happen today. It probably won't happen in the future, but it did happen. Seagal made it happen. So one of the reasons he made it happen, the man had legit martial arts skills. He was actually a bodyguard for several actors, including Kelly LeBrock, whom he later married. But he was also the bodyguard of an agent, Michael Orvitz. And Michael Orvitz was so fascinated and impressed with Seagal that he ended up getting him in this movie, and as well as several other movies from Warner Brothers. And Seagal had the charisma, he had the talent, the skills, and he became a star as a result. So prior to this, as far as Hollywood's concerned, outside of being a bodyguard to Hollywood talent, he did choreograph some fight scenes in several movies, including one with Sean Connery, one of the James Bond movies. And there's a really funny story behind that. I believe he actually broke Sean Connery's wrist. Speaking of fight choreography, that's one of the things I really liked about this Seagal movie, and as well as a lot of his earlier work. So this was a first American film that actually showcased Aikido, for one. For two, Aikido does actually come across on screen pretty well. Before or prior to this, we've seen Chuck Norris, we've seen Bruce Lee, so karate, kung fu, etc. It's basically the striking arts. Aikido is so different. It's more defensive. It's more about positioning and using the opponent's momentum and body movement against them, all combined with a series of just different joint locks. So here's a classic live demonstration from the Merv Griffin show. This was circa 1982, well before Above the Law was ever produced. The man just comes across very, very graceful, just beautiful technique that up until this point we just really haven't seen.
As he comes for me, I don't use
Now, the fight scenes in the film are obviously choreographed, but they don't look overly choreographed. And when I say that, if you look at some of the modern films, you could tell the actors are already know what techniques come, and it's way too telegraphed. Whereas Seagal, there's a sense of realism here. I mean, he knows what the people are going to do, but when they throw the strike, it comes off way more realistic as far as, I mean, Seagal's just got masterful timing, and they capture that in this film. It just doesn't look overly choreographed as far as them getting the timing just right. You could see Seagal really really just timing it as if he were to in real life. Besides co-producing, co-writing, and starring in the film, Seagal was heavily involved in choreographing the fights and stunts. He chose every punch and throw used in the martial arts scenes. Seagal also personally selected every weapon. The sword fighting sequence was staged using Seagal's own martial arts students. Seagal says, "I truly feel the fights are more authentic than ever seen in film. The techniques are very simple, very street, very lethal moves." And I tend to agree. The techniques themselves aren't overly complicated. It's the masterfulness of the technique, the perfection of it, that's what really sticks out. And I think that really played a big role in the authenticity of the film and making him a big star. You really can't not be an Aikido master and come across like this. I mean, you could get an actor with 3 months training or even a year of training. He's not going to come across like this. Now they can over choreograph it, cut it just right, put a million cuts in the film and make the person look good, but they're still not going to look like Steven. Kind of similar to Van Damme in Bloodsport, especially on those pulled out shots with him doing these high flying jump kicks. That kind of beautiful technique, like you can't learn that in 3 months or even a year necessarily. You really got to know it, and that's what really made Van Damme and Seagal so popular back then, because we didn't have things like the UFC. We really didn't have anything to showcase great martial artists outside of the silver screen. Above the Law was perfect for Seagal. In fact, Steven Seagal himself chose a film from a pile of scripts that Warner Brothers had been saving for Clint Eastwood. It was rewritten to actually focus on Seagal's actual backstory. The opening sequence is actually very biography-like, documentary-like. There's actual photographs of Steven Seagal as he was growing up. Now, when I first seen the film, I thought it was kind of a pseudo-documentary on his life, just the way it came across. And this was pre-internet days when it came out, so there's really no way to verify anything, but this whole time, I thought Seagal was Italian. Apparently, he's Irish and Russian, of Irish and Russian descent. But he plays an Italian character named Nico Toscani. Funny thing is, there's actually a toy line, and what I really like about this, it says ages 4 and up. This is a really gritty action police crime drama, so I don't know. Well, then again, I had the Rambo 2 toy when I was like 8 years old, and that's not exactly a kid's movie either. But anyway, I digress. Now, the backstory between Steven Seagal's own life and Above the Law are very similar. He actually did move to Japan at a very young age, and did actually have his own dojo in Japan as well, which is very interesting. Being a Westerner and all, that just doesn't happen, having your own school in Japan. Now, that was partly, most likely, related to the fact that he was married at the time to the daughter of an Aikido instructor, so I'm sure that helped him get his own school there, but regardless, the man's lived a fascinating life. He'd also claimed ties to being a CIA operative, which they delve into that in the film, but as far as real life goes, it's really hard to say. Above the Law falls in the golden era of Seagal films, which is no surprise since this was his first official film. The golden era took place between 1988 and 1991 and encompassed 4 different films: Above the Law, Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, and it ended with Out for Justice. One commonality you'll find in all of Seagal's golden era films are the titles. They all consist of 3 words: simple, straight to the point. Surprisingly, one thing you won't find in common is his iconic ponytail. Above the Law, he actually does not have his ponytail, which has become synonymous with Steven Seagal's image. That'll make its official debut in his next film, Hard to Kill. Speaking of Hard to Kill, not the movie but the actual phrase, one of the complaints I heard, and I actually had an argument with one of my friends in college, is Seagal seems too invincible, which it partly makes sense because of Aikido. If he was a great Aikido master and he's getting hit and beat up on, he's not that great of an Aikido master. So the art form's all about defense. Now, Seagal has he does actually make a more brutal version of it with a series of strikes, which makes sense, especially in an action film. But if he were getting beat up by different opponents and enemies, his Aikido skills obviously would suck. And there's no way he'd want to portray that in a film. Above the Law does a good overall job of explaining why Seagal became so popular. He's fast, he's quick, the Aikido looks convincing. The quickness of the fights make them stand out from other action pictures of the time. The fights are also more raw and brutal than many martial arts films, especially American ones. His style is not as much about looking cool as it is about dispatching opponents as quickly and brutally as possible. The story for Above the Law was from the director Andrew Davis as well as Seagal. Both men also produced the film. If you don't know who Andrew Davis is, he actually ended up directing The Fugitive, so pretty big name in Hollywood overall. Andrew Davis was hired to direct because Steven Seagal liked Code of Silence, a Chuck Norris movie that Andrew Davis directed. The film had a lot in common. Both movies starred martial artists, both about Chicago cops, corruption, and drug lords, and both even had the same main villain, Henry Silva. The man just looks like a villain. To quickly summarize the plot of the film, a martial arts expert and former CIA agent, Nico Toscani, played by Steven Seagal of course, is working as a Chicago cop when a relatively routine drug trafficking investigation leads to an international conspiracy. Soon Nico and his partner, Dolores Jackson, played by Pam Grier, are the targets of a mysterious and powerful criminals, but he refuses to back down. As Nico gets deeper into the case, he must contend with an old adversary, corrupt CIA operative Kurt Zagan, played by Henry Silva. The title, Above the Law, actually refers to the CIA who think they are above the law. But not for Steven Seagal, they're not. Seagal actually took the politics of the movie pretty seriously, saying in the press notes that this is not a martial arts film. It's based on a true story about CIA complicity in narcotics trafficking for the purpose of funding covert operations. This is as much a movie about the abuse of power, about government corruption, as well as pretty badass Aikido moves, shootouts, and awesome car chases. Seagal's CIA and Aikido background, as well as a theme of corrupt intelligence agencies, can be seen in many of Seagal's films throughout the years. With that said, this film has a sense of outrage that eventually does disappear from his later work. Early on in his film work, he was able to be more passionate about wrongdoing, as clearly evidenced here.
I can make you disappear. Grab his leg.
What the hell are you doing, man?
Nico! 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 Nico!
You guys think you're soldiers? You're fucking barbarians!
But later on, he'd mostly play cynical characters who have pretty much seen it all and are just plain cynics at that point in their life. Above the Law goes out of its way to show Nico's close relationship to his family. Many early Seagal films actually have sweet bonding moments like this to show his love for his son or his wife. In later films, he mostly plays single loners who have little connection to other people, though he often does hook up briefly with a pretty younger woman by the end of the film. You dirty old dog, Steven. According to Verne in the book Seagology, more than any other action star I know of, Seagal puts his imprint on every movie he makes, whether he's writing and producing it or just appearing in it. He brings a certain personality, formula, and a set of motifs to pretty much every picture he ever does. Most actors try to find scripts they can work with. Seagal seems to have scripts grow out of him. Seagal once said, "I haven't always been dealt scripts that were palatable and movies that I thought were even makeable, and I think one of the secrets of my success is that I changed them into something that was almost watchable. These scripts are written for him, or by him, or they are rewritten to fit him, so they always end up featuring some of his obsessions. Enlightened men with shadowy CIA pasts, Westerners with expertise in Asian ways, various types of mafia, music, much of it performed or written by Seagal himself, and the protection of animals or the environment. Much of it you'll see later on, particularly in the films from the Silver era. Overall, there's probably not a more polarizing action hero out there. Love him or hate him, there's probably nobody who's indifferent towards him, but without him, we'd clearly be missing out on some great action cinema. So that's the video, guys. Hopefully you got a little more new appreciation for Seagal, at least for his earlier work. He's got some really legit, beautiful Aikido skills, and hopefully you can appreciate that. Anyway, see you guys next time.